Public authorities do have a lot of information with regards to the citizens of the country. So now the Sri Lankans are able to access this information with regards to Right to Information Act being in effect from the very early of February. So today we are going to have a special interview with Mr Venkatesh Nayak, who is the convener of the National Campaign for People's Right to Information in India and the coordinator of the Access to Information Programme and the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative. He is also associated with the RTI movements, not only in India but several other countries including Tanzania, the Caribbean region, and especially when it comes to many South Asian countries including Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal and also Sri Lanka. Well, yes, Mr. Nayak, first of all, this Right to Information Act, it is completely a new concept to Sri Lankans. What is RTI?
RTI is a basic human right. 2 years ago, it was incorporated in the Sri Lankan constitution as a fundamental right. What it basically means is that a citizen of Sri Lanka has the right to seek information from any ministry or department or other public authorities as a matter of right and expect to receive the information within a specific period of time. And if the information cannot be provided to that person, then he or she has a right to know the reasons as to why the information cannot be provided. So it's basically a law that facilitates people's right to seek and receive information from government in Sri Lanka.
So what is your contribution towards the Rights to Information Act here in Sri Lanka?
Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, which you mentioned earlier in my introduction, has been associated with the process of drafting the Right to Information law in Sri Lanka since 2003. More recently, when the current bill was drafted, which has now become law, we worked with the members of the drafting committee and also various other stakeholders. So we provided inputs into the process of drafting the law, and we worked with civil society to raise awareness about the contents of the law by holding workshops and conferences here. And we've also conducted learning programs for civil society and government representatives from Sri Lanka to come to India for a week's time and understand how the Indian government has implemented the Right to Information law so that they could come back and find solutions to the typical challenges that are involved in the implementation of a law that requires government to be completely transparent about its work.
Well, Mr. Nayak, now we're talking about this Right to Information Act. What sort of information can a citizen access through this law being implemented in a country like Sri Lanka? What is the procedure in brief?
Yes. First of all, let me clarify that the Right to Information law is not only about citizens asking information that directly relates to their personal interests. Because they are citizens of Sri Lanka and Sri Lanka is a democracy, they are voters, they are taxpayers, they can ask information about anything or everything that the government does. The law also states what kinds of information will not be provided under what circumstances, because sometimes disclosing information may not be in the public interest, it may be injurious to the public interest. So those circumstances are also laid down. So what the law provides for is it explains what all kinds of information people can access. For example, information that is in material form. It could be in the form of records, files, documents, audio-video material. It could also be opinion and advice, or even samples of materials that are used in public construction works. You can ask for a whole range of information. And the law provides for two processes for seeking information. Number one, and that is the emphasis that the law presents, it says that certain categories of information must be given to people without waiting for them to ask for it, what is called proactive disclosure. So that's the first process. So there's a whole range of information regarding how a public authority is structured, how it functions, what its budgets look like, what kinds of services it provides to people. All of that must be made public. Every ministry that implements developmental projects with government funding or foreign funding above a certain threshold have to make information about those projects public in advance. Now this is the first process. The second process is whatever information is not proactively disclosed, people can make formal requests and seek information. So that process is time bound. Within 14 days, a response must be provided whether the person can be provided the information or not. And once the department decides that the information can be provided, then citizens need to pay a nominal cost towards reproducing the information, making photocopies or in the form of getting on pen drives or whatever. And in fact, if they want information on email, that information has to be provided free of charge. The law also says, supposing the government department refuses to provide access to information, then where can the citizen go? The law says that the first remedy lies within the same department that refused access to information. So there is a time-bound appeal procedure, and even there, if the requester for information is not satisfied with the decision of the department, then he can go to an external appellate authority, which is the RTI Commission. The RTI Commission also, through a time-bound process, has to review the decision of the department concerned, whether they were correct in refusing access to information or not. And if they believe that no, this information ought to have been provided, then they can order the disclosure of that information. So this is, roughly speaking, the procedure for seeking information through various steps.
Well, yes, the Rti of India, it happens to be 12 years old,
Yes.
whereas initially India stood at the third place from the world, but now Sri Lanka is at the third place. How do you see this development?
Well, I would say that Sri Lanka has learned from the implementation process that India has gone through over a 12-year period. In 2005, when the Indian law was passed, it was rated by international experts as, like you said, the third best in the world. But our law does have certain gaps and loopholes, which thankfully became apparent in the context of the implementation. And that experience is something that was shared with Sri Lanka, and some of those loopholes were plugged. And that's the reason why today Sri Lankan law is rated better than the Indian law. And in fact, it's the best rated in the world. And it's in the top 5 category. And I'm hoping that the implementation also will be top rated in the future.
Why not? Well, yes, with regards to the Right to Information Act being implemented here in Sri Lanka, what sort of challenges that Sri Lanka can undergo with regards to this being implemented?
You see, when you read a Right to Information law, it looks pretty simple. It lays down the procedures for making requests for information, and then says what kinds of information will not be given under what circumstances. Everything is time bound, and then the requester has to pay a little bit of money to get the copies, like I said earlier. However, when it comes to actual implementation, there are several challenges, because we call right to information laws as paradigm shifting laws. Because what happens is, until a right to information law is passed, governments generally work on the principle of sharing information with citizenry on a need to know basis. RTI says that you can actually demand access to information as a matter of right. Making this change from a need to know basis to providing information as a matter of right is a huge jump. That requires a lot of guidance, it requires a lot of training, it requires a lot of sensitization of public authorities, ministries, departments and local authorities in the provinces on how to implement this regime of transparency. So that is the first challenge. The second challenge is to ensure that people actually make use of the law to seek information, because the right to information movement in Sri Lanka, quite unlike what happened in India, did not come off as a grassroots level movement. So the demand for information in India came from the grassroots. Now here, since it was a movement that was led by the very educated and very sensitive people who want to have a transparency law in Sri Lanka, now the challenge is to make sure that awareness about the procedures for seeking information spreads across the country amongst the citizenry as quickly as possible. Because the right to information law is something that gets implemented only when people start seeking information. Otherwise, the government has no duties to provide access to information unless people ask for it.
Yeah.
So apart from proactive disclosure, of course. So that's the reason why it's crucial to ensure that awareness of this law spreads as quickly as possible and people start making information requests. And from the media reports, I can find, I understand that requests are already being made since the notification of the regulations in early February, and that's a very good sign.
Well, when it comes to implementing a new law, or rather the Right to Information Act itself,
Yes.
what sort of steps were taken in implementing or rather giving awareness to the general public with regards to this act?
You see, the preparations for implementing a right to information law have to happen at 3 levels. Number one, there must be preparations in the what we call the supply side of information, which is primarily the ministries, departments, public authorities and other local authorities from whom people can seek information, which means they have to appoint special point persons called information officers who will receive and then make decisions on people's information requests. And then there has to be a designated officer who will listen to appeals against unreasonable refusal of access to information. So this is as far as supply side is concerned. I'm just summarizing it. The demand side of information, it is crucial to ensure that awareness of the right to information law spreads as widely as possible. There are a variety of methods of doing it, and I think this interview itself is one way of spreading awareness about the various procedures in the law. A third level is what we call the adjudication stage. Supposing a public authority says, sorry, we cannot give you this information, and that decision is upheld at the first appeal stage, then there has to be an information commission that needs to be set up, and this law provides for that. So there is a 5-member commission which is based in Colombo. All 5 members, including the chairperson of the commission, have been appointed. Now, setting up that institution for the purpose of listening to the complaints of people who do not get access to information that they have requested for. So that is the third step that needs to be done. So this is, roughly speaking, the canvas on which the implementation process actually works. However, change, like I said, from a regime of secrecy to transparency is not easy. It actually requires strategizing how to implement a law of this kind, proactive disclosure. How do you develop the various categories of information that need to be proactively made public? Where do you put it up? How do you design a website? These are all preparations that need to be made, and most importantly, all of this requires money, which means that budget allocation has to be there for ensuring that there are adequate resources for doing all these things. And the good thing that has happened is that this government, after passing the Right to Information Act last year, has actually allocated resources for the purpose of implementing this law, and that is a very good sign.
Well, yes. With regards to the Right to Information Act being implemented and then people are getting awareness of this, what sort of a role does mass media play in this?
Well, I would say that mass media actually played quite a major role in the campaign towards the Right to Information law. So the media sector was one of the leaders in the advocacy movement for the institution of the Right to Information law in the statute book. Now their task is even more complex, because they are not only organizations and the people who work in mass media organizations can actually make information requests of public interest and then make use of it in the public domain. They also have the additional duty of spreading awareness about this law. So the mass media has a major role to play, and I would also add to that a third role, which is monitoring the implementation of the Act. How have public authorities, ministries, departments, local authorities complied with the Right to Information law? Have they appointed information officers? So making an assessment of these kinds of things. So the role played by the mass media is multifarious, and I'm quite confident that with the kind of involvement that we have seen of the mass media in the movement towards establishing a transparency regime in Sri Lanka, the role that they are required to play in the implementation process, I'm sure that they are really going to do it. It certainly looks very positive.
A variety of information falls under this Right to Information Act. People can access to different sort of information. Yes. Now, what is the benefit, the major benefit of a Right to Information Act for the civilians, the normal citizens of the country?
You see, at a personal level, experience from my own country shows that whenever people have a difficulty in accessing a particular service that a ministry or a department or a public authority provides, Right to Information actually works like magic to ensure that the service is provided if the eligibility criteria are met with. For example, if somebody has applied for a water supply connection and has met all the requirements that are to be completed in terms of ensuring that the connection comes, but then 6 months down the line, the connection has never been provided. So then all that the person has to do is put in an information request asking reasons for delay. So very often, instead of giving the information, the supply gets connected, the water supply gets connected. So water starts flowing through his taps. This is at a personal level. But at the larger macro level, what I can make of Right to Information law is it actually establishes a power equation between citizens and government on an even keel, because in a democracy, citizens are uppermost. It is their interests that the government has to protect, and with an access to information law being in place, people will be in a position to demand transparency, and once they get the information, they will be able to hold government accountable for its spending decisions, other kinds of administrative decisions, developmental decisions, which actually are connected directly with people's interests. So both at the micro level and the macro level, I think citizens in Sri Lanka can benefit in a very big way. Governance can be made participatory, because once you start having access to information about what government is planning to do, you will be able to make suggestions to government departments about how to do it better. So it helps in making democracy participatory from the representative nature that it is right now.
Well, yes, now the Right to Information Act being implemented, and Mr. Nayak being a very influential character in this procedure here in Sri Lanka as well in the implementation of this act. How was the response from the civilians here in Sri Lanka and compared to India? Now we are the third place of the world. How do you see the response?
I think soon after the notification of the regulations happened, on that very day, people were ready with their information requests. That's exactly what happened in India.
Yeah.
However, given the fact that India has 1.2 billion, as a population, the number of information requests are many more there, about 5 to 5.5 million. But in Sri Lanka, I think the start has been very good. Information requests are being made by even women citizens, and that is a very positive thing here. But that needs to now escalate. It has to have a multiplier effect. Many more people need to make information requests. Many more people need to get into the task of assessing compliance with the requirements of the Right to Information law, and that is the best way ahead to ensure effective implementation of the law, because right to information is also about citizens giving feedback to public authorities about how they are actually functioning. The queries themselves are like a feedback, and that feedback, if it is taken in a positive way, then governance, the quality of governance can really improve.
Well, yes, as we have reached the very end of the special interview that we're having with Mr. Nayak, I would love to know what sort of challenges will the Sri Lankan government face with regards to this kind of a law being implemented here in Sri Lanka. It is for the very first time, and Sri Lankans are now able to access this information. What sort of challenges, and one final word from you as a very active person in the implementation process of the Right to Information Act?
I think the challenge would be in making decisions regarding providing access to information. And there, the only word of advice that I would give is that when in doubt, don't prefer secrecy, prefer transparency. And that is what is required under the Right to Information law.
Well, yes, that's the final word by Mr. Nayak, who is all the way from India. Mr. Venkatesh Nayak, the co-convener of the National Campaign for People's Right to Information in India and the coordinator of the Access to Information program with the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative. Thank you very much for being with us today at Sri Lanka Rupawani Corporation with regards to giving a lot of information, a very special, a very informative interview with you, Mr. Nayak. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Nathalie.